Well, now I want to turn to Matt Woods and have Matt talk to us again about one of his dioramas. Matt, welcome.
Good evening, everyone. Matt Woods here. Hope you're having a good holiday season so far. This is my fourth presentation, and unfortunately, my last one, unless I'm invited back. So last week we discussed some scenery techniques and using some commercially available products. So this week I want to address some low cost or inexpensive scenery techniques using more readily available materials that you can get in craft stores and home improvement stores and so forth. So that's what we're going to address this week. Okay, so as I said, I'm presenting some information on low cost modeling materials. And on this opening page, I made a little vignette as kind of a sample or test piece or study. And it's just kind of a rural scene, a Civil War era country cemetery and a sheep pasture. So I'm going to show you a few slides that kind of depict some of these low cost materials, and I'll give a little commentary on each of them. This is a kind of a country road scene, and most of the grass that you see was done with jute. So it's jute twine or rope that has been unraveled and cut into tufts and secured with glue. And this is an example of simulating the commercially available tufts that we discussed last week with a much more inexpensive material. Certainly, it's more labor intensive, and it takes some practice to achieve the tufts. You're basically cutting off a small amount of unwind jute twine and holding it in one hand and kind of making a little tuft and then gluing it in place. But this is just one example. Here is an example utilizing primarily China bristle brushes as a fiber material. So most of the foreground grass in front of the locomotive was done with China bristle brushes and some craft brooms. You go to these various craft stores and you see these cinnamon brooms that smell very good, and they're made out of a very fine kind of woody type material, and they make an excellent just small trees and underbrush. Here's another scene that was done primarily with jute, some of the craft brooms, and evergreens made out of artificial steel wool. And I'll get into some techniques on how I went about that. But this is kind of a riverbank scene. And almost everything in that scene is either natural material, such as the logs and the deadfall, or stuff that was obtained from a craft store. There's another shot of that. Here again, using the China bristle brushes. China bristle brush, for those who are not familiar with it, and I'm going to have another photo of these materials in their raw form, but they're just a very inexpensive brush that's actually made out of pig hair. And they come in different widths, and you can cut off the fibers, and they have an excellent natural color to them. So they're basically ready to go. And I'm also using some baby's breath here that had been dyed. Most of this is secured with hot glue. And unfortunately, you can kind of see some of the hot glue holding the tufts in place. And, you need to be careful with how you actually secure them, but we'll get into that a little bit more. Okay, so what kind of prompted this presentation was that I had put some scenery photos of mine on one of the Owen 30 Facebook pages, and somebody made the commentary that scenery materials were expensive, particularly if you're doing an entire layout. And I think, there's some truth to that, in that, with some of the new materials that are out, particularly some of the grass mats and, some of these different tufts and so forth, you can get into a fair amount of money. So, the use of these more natural type fibers and just, anything that resembles a grass, whether it be a paintbrush, whether it be unwind jute or twine, polyfiber, these types of things, can all be used for scenery. And, as the hobby shops have started to disappear and, it's just more difficult to get some of these materials. Like, I love the Martin Wellberg scenery products. And, I've used his stuff extensively, but unfortunately, there's such a high demand for his stuff through Scenic Express that many times it's out of stock. So, if you're going along and you're trying to build scenery and you can't get a certain material that you've been using, that kind of leaves you in a bind. So, being able to use these other materials and have pretty much an endless supply of them that you can secure, from Walmart or Lowe's or wherever, is much more convenient. Also, I believe that, kind of doing this old school method enhances the creativity and the artistry and gives you maybe more modeling satisfaction than simply a peel and stick type approach where you're just pulling tufts off a package and gluing them down. So, there's some skill and there's some technique involved in using these materials, and we'll touch a little bit on that. Here's a prototype scene that has kind of inspired some of my recent work. And, this is an Amish farm in an area that it's kind of a reclaimed strip mill or strip mine area. And, this was taken this fall recently, and you can see the different color tones. There a lot of the grass, even in the pasture, has started to dry out. So there's a variation of the green where the animals have been consistently grazing, and then you have these drier tones along the fence line. So to me, above all else, when it comes to scenery, color is everything. Color trumps detail for certain. If the colors are correct, if you have a muted, realistic, natural tones, then detail is kind of secondary. And your eye and your mind will tell you that something looks right if the coloration is right. Another thing I would emphasize, and I kind of hinted on this, is, these raw materials, they don't come in, a prepackaged, ready to use form. So, it takes some work to be able to convert them into usable modeling products or material. Here's a sample of a little cemetery I made. Those tombstones, they're all made out of mat board or chipboard. I basically just cut strips of chipboard and then cut them into little pieces and rounded off the edges a little bit and made a little tombstone, and then painted them with some various gray tones and put some white on them to resemble kind of a whitewashed finish that had faded. all the underbrush, that's all artificial steel wool. And when I'm going to show you what that looks like in its raw form, but it's not there's no metal to it. It's a plastic fiber that comes in a pad that can be torn apart, and it has these nice kind of stringy fibers to it. And when you put hairspray and ground foam on it, it makes an excellent underbrush. So in this photo, I've used a lot of jute to represent the dead grass, and I've made tufts and so forth out of the jute. So here's a quick list, and this is not meant to be exhaustive in any sense. Depending on what you're building, there's a whole array of materials that you can use, for structures that would be inexpensive and easily accessible. But from a scenery standpoint, I have highlighted a few different materials that I like to use. We have the jute, which comes in a kind of a ball of twine or rope. The 3M artificial steel wool, which is a gray pad. The China bristle brushes or hog hair brushes, which are normally about $1, $2 a piece. These miniature craft brooms. I used to be able to find them very readily at Pat Catan's and Michael's and different craft stores. They're just like a miniature broom that was made out of some unique fiber that I don't know where they got the material. And you used to be able to find them, all the time. For some reason, they've stopped importing them. And fortunately, I went to a secondhand store and bought a bunch of them a few months ago. So I have a pretty extensive supply now, but it has little leaves on it, and it's a kind of an interesting material. Another thing is polyfiber. I was fortunate that I was able to find some brown polyfiber that AccuRail had made sometime in the past. So I have kind of a lifetime supply of that. And then dried and crumbled leaves. And that's just, taking leaves and crumbling them up and drying them out and make sure you kill all the bugs and so forth in the oven. So here is a photo of some of these raw materials. We got our jute, we got our China bristle brushes, we got some brown polyfiber, we have one of the 3M artificial steel wool pads, and then these craft brooms. As you can see with that, it's kind of a useful looking fiber, and you can cut off pieces and insert them into holes and glue them into a bunch. And it makes a very interesting fiber that kind of resembles poverty grass. If you've seen that, that grows readily in the Midwest at least, and has kind of a reddish tone to it. So, and it could even be used as corn, dried out corn stalks in smaller scales. So here's another photo of that country road scene, and you can see that I've used the jute extensively. There's some, it's called different names, the leafy material. It was very common, I think back in the 80s, 90s, a lot of narrow gauge modelers used that particular material. Pepper grass, I think is what it's called. That's a lot of what the leafy trees are made of. This was a little study that I did, or a sample. Supposed to be an abandoned logging line where they'd ripped up the rails. And here I'm just using a variety of these inexpensive materials, from the jute to baby's breaths, a little bit of the artificial steel wool, a stump made out of a dowel, and some air dry clay. So there's just a lot of things you can do scenically if you have a little creativity and experiment. Okay, so kind of procedurally, or more of a step-by-step view, here's that scene of the cemetery and the sheep pasture. So we start off with a scenic base using ground foam on a painted foam base, and put in our fence posts with those are just wooden dowels, thin wooden dowels that have been scribed with a razor saw, and I've glued the tombstones in place. The bottom left, I've put some matte medium down on the ground foam and sprinkled on some chopped jute. And in this case, your eye tells you it looks, when it's dry, it looks like dried grass, where the grass has gotten matted down and has gone kind of to seed and dried out. It doesn't have to be standing up that much to be convincing. And also, I've hot glued in some of the artificial steel wool, creating kind of our fence row with a lot of underbrush. In the upper right, I've put some more of the chopped jute onto the sheep pasture. And if you go around in the countryside, particularly in the east, you'll see these pastures, start taking on more of a dried out tone to them. Even the ones that consistently have animals grazing. And this kind of harkens back a little bit to our presentation last week where I did the fence rows. I guess I'm somewhat obsessed with fence rows and rural scenes and so forth, but you can very effectively simulate that type of a scene with these materials. And then I've sprinkled on ground foam onto the artificial steel wool using hairspray to secure it. So here's more of a close-up, detailed look of those materials. So you see there's a lot of just fibers and you can create the detail by cutting the material into the proper lengths. It takes a little practice and dexterity, and tweezers are pretty essential for being able to grasp the tufts and just glue them in place with, I use a lot of Aleene's tacky glue, but I'll also use some Loctite CA to secure some of this stuff. And once again, coloration is everything. I like fall and the muted tones, the natural materials lend themselves to fall in particular. Here we have a lot of usage of the China bristle brush and just a variety of materials, the baby's breath, some craft broom, an evergreen made of artificial steel wool. And here's another look at another sheep pasture study, so to speak. This is a barbed wire fence made out of dowels and brown thread. And it's a little tedious trying to glue the thread, getting it to stay taut onto the fence post, but it's worth the effort. The final product looks pretty good, and it's better than spending $16 on a 30 inches of Woodland Scenics barbed wire. Here's just another prototype scene, just showing that differentiation between the different color tones. The fence row seems to have more of a dried out coloration to it. And I think I presented this picture in one of the previous presentations, and that building would make a great dilapidated scratch build. Okay, I'm going to hit a little bit on my artificial steel wool evergreens. This is to any Maine 2-footers out there. This is the Sanders water tower minus the spout. This was a winter scene that I did, but those trees in the background, I'm going to kind of show you how I did those. Here's some more of my artificial steel wool evergreens. Here's a whole forest of them getting ready to be used. Actually, sold some of these. About the time the pandemic hit, I was in, trying to produce these, furiously trying to produce them. There were some train shows coming up, and unfortunately, those got canceled due to the early pandemic. But this was how I was going to market them and sell them. Okay, so what that involves is you get these inexpensive wooden dowels from Walmart. They come in a pack of about 100, and they're probably about an 1/8 inch in wide, and they're probably about 6 to 8 inches long. And you can scribe them with a razor saw to give some texture. And small pines are thinner. The trunks are thinner than you might think. They're more spindly, and the trunks are a little bit thinner than you think. So having the thin dowel is useful for a tree that would not be a large pine tree. And what I've done is I take pieces of the artificial steel wool, and you're basically using smaller and smaller disc as you go up the trunk, but you hot glue each level onto the trunk. And when you get to the top, you just kind of cap off the top of the dowel. And then spray it with hairspray and sprinkle on a green ground foam of your choice. What I like to do is put on a layer of Woodland Scenics blended turf first, and then a sparser coating of a muted green ground foam. But this is comparable to the kind of the furnace filter technique that many people are probably familiar with. But I find that the artificial steel wool has an even better texture. It's a little coarser, and it's a little bit messy to work with, because when you tear the pads apart, there's a grit that is contained within the pad, and it's a black grit, and that has a tendency to get all over things. But it is a very useful scenic material. And here's just kind of a final shot of a riverbank scene utilizing a lot of those artificial steel wool evergreens. So does anybody have any questions?
Well, Matt, I'll tell you, I for one am so impressed with the skill that you have and the artistic flair that you use in creating your dioramas. I hope that you will come back next year and give us some more examples of your work, because I think it's just beautiful, and I think we can all learn an awful lot and frankly save a lot of money.
Well, thank you very much, and it's been a pleasure presenting these ideas, and I'd be happy to come back if you'll have me.
But no question about that. You're very talented, and can't thank you enough for everything that you're doing. Anybody have any questions for Matt before you leave?
I do. Larry McDonald here. When you use the jute and you untwine it, do you soak it and then hang it with some weights on so it straightens it out a bit rather than?
No. Most of the useful lengths that you're going to use for tufts and kind of simulating grass are going to be pretty short. It does have a tendency to curl a little bit. But by and large, if you keep the lengths, probably a 1/4 inch or less, it's fairly straight. It will stay fairly straight. But I haven't really experimented with doing anything to make it straighter. Now, the China bristle brushes in particular, that's a coarser material, and those fibers will stay much straighter. But the jute does have a tendency to curl a little bit, and that's maybe one of the drawbacks of it.
Thank
Matt,
you very
Steve
much.
Sherrill here.
Yes.
I've got,
Yes.
got a question. I'm making a Z-scale micro mini layout. Now, it's awfully small. When you talk about using jute and things like this, there's got to be a minimum height that you can cut this stuff down to. What other product would you suggest I use on this project that I've got?
Well, if you can snip that jute as fine as you want, and even laying down flat, it still will create the color tones that are realistic. So I think that whether it's standing straight up or whether it's actually flat, you can still achieve the effect. So I would just do some experimentation with it, and kind of try some different samples and see how you like working with it. But most of that stuff that I had, like in those pastures, was just tiny little snips, and I just laid it basically flat on top of carbon foam. But when you want to make the tufts, I'll use tweezers and cut it down to 1/8 of an inch or 3/16 probably, which in Z scale is going to be probably equivalent to 3 or 4 feet tall.
Yeah, you'll be taller than the first floor of a building. That's the only problem if you've got it near that. It's just the perspective. I'm working with it. I've got it. It's just you can only use certain products, I think, to attain that height.
Yeah, it's just a matter of trial and error. I mean, I don't have it down perfectly by any means. I'm still experimenting with some of these techniques. I've done 3 or 4 little dioramas, just kind of practicing. I'll probably, for the majority of my stuff, go back to some of the other commercial products, but it's good to mix it up, I think.
Yeah, you do fantastic.
Thank you so much, Matt. We really do appreciate it and look forward to seeing you back next year.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas, everybody.